The woods didn't start at the property line, they loomed over it. For David, a freelance architect seeking isolation to finish his latest designs, the cheap colonial house on the edge of the unincorporated New England wilderness seemed like a dream. He'd ignored the local whispered warnings about the old-growth lot, dismissing them as rural superstition designed to keep city folks away. The first month was peaceful. Too peaceful. There was a profound silence that settled over the area after dusk. No crickets, no owls, no wind in the canopy. It was a silence that felt heavy, almost predatory. The trouble began with the dreams. David would dream he was standing in his own living room, looking out the large, central window that faced the tree line. But in the dream, the forest was inside. Gnarled roots pushed up through his hardwood floors, and thick, black vines wrapped around his drafted schematics. The air in these dreams smelled of wet earth and copper. He dismissed the nightmares as stress. The tight deadlines were getting to him. But then, the visual anomalies started during his waking hours. He'd be sitting at his desk, and out of the corner of his eye, he'd see movement. Not a deer or a bird, but a slow, deliberate swaying that didn't match the lack of wind. When he looked directly, everything was still. The shadows among the ancient oaks seemed too deep, too structured. The trunks appeared to shift their positions, like a slow-motion game of statues being played just beyond his direct vision. One rainy Tuesday, while standing on his back porch, David noticed something wedged into the bark of a large, skeletal oak tree near the boundary. He stepped past the tree line to investigate. The air immediately changed. It was frigid, smelling of decay and old, burnt wood. Wedged in the bark was a human tooth, molten-looking silver filling and all. He backed away, but not before noticing dozens of small, deliberate cuts in the surrounding trunks, all weeping a dark, viscous sap that looked suspiciously like blood. That night, the physical phenomena escalated. The knocking began. It wasn't a branch scratching the siding. It was rhythmic, heavy, and deliberate. 3 knocks on the rear wall of the house. Thump, thump, thump. David grabbed a flashlight and checked the yard. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbances. But when he returned to his desk, all his blueprints had been stacked neatly in the center of the floor. The next morning, his dog, Barnaby, a previously fearless golden retriever, refused to go outside. The animal huddled under the kitchen table, whining and staring at the window with wide, terrified eyes. David had to drag him to the car to take him to a friend's house in town. The dog never looked back. The isolation was becoming a cage. David knew he should leave, but a morbid fascination, or perhaps an external compulsion, held him. He began staying awake all night, drinking black coffee, and simply watching the tree line from his living room window. He started noticing patterns. The strange, skeletal silhouettes of the dead trees didn't form random clusters. They formed a shape. From the right angle, looking through his window, the trunks, branches, and vines coalesced into a massive, shadowy humanoid form, crouched and waiting. The forest was watching him. The night of the final incident was the stormiest of the summer. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the chaotic wilderness. Thunder shook the very foundations of the old house. David sat in his armchair, the only light coming from a single desk lamp. The window was a black void. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking was on the door this time. He didn't move. He knew if he looked, he would see something he could not unsee. Thump, thump, thump. The door groaned under the force. A crackling, wet sound began to emanate from above him. He looked up. Dark sap was seeping through the ceiling plaster, pooling and dripping onto his rug. The smell of the old-growth lot filled the room. Then, he felt it, a sudden, overwhelming urge to look at the window. It was like a magnetic pull. His head turned slowly, against his will. Through the rain-streaked glass, a face was pressed against the pane. It wasn't human. It was made of twisted bark and woven twigs, with hollows for eyes that burned with a cold, green fire. Behind it, The shadowy forest entity had fully coalesced, standing upright, its thorny hands resting on the side of his house. The face in the window opened its mouth, a gash of splintered wood, and spoke, though no sound passed through the glass. The words echoed directly in David's mind, in the voice of the person who had warned him first. "It's your turn to be a tree, David." A vine, thick and cold as a serpent, wrapped around his ankle, pulling him from the chair. He grabbed the desk, but the wood was wet and slick. He was dragged across the room, toward the rear of the house, toward the cellar door that he never used. The cellar door banged open, seemingly on its own. The air rushing up smelled of ancient, wet earth. Roots were already covering the stairs, and the entire room below was filled with the forest's architecture. As David was pulled into the darkness, his fingernails clawing at the wooden floorboards, his last sight of the living room was of his blueprints on the desk, now covered in the same black, weeping sap. The next day, David's car was found in the driveway, completely untouched. The house was empty. The police searched the property but found no trace of him. The local newspaper ran a story titled, "Architect Missing, Foul Play Suspected," but the investigation quickly went cold. 6 months later, a new family moved into the old colonial house, attracted by the low price and the peaceful isolation. The mother, an amateur artist, immediately set up her easel by the large, central window that faced the old-growth lot. "Look at that strange tree," she remarked one evening, pointing towards the boundary line. "It almost looks like it's reaching out, and the bark is formed into such expressive, human-like shapes." Her husband looked and shrugged. "It's just an old oak, honey. Nature makes weird shapes sometimes. It's beautiful, in a spooky way." The tree she was looking at was new. It had a strange, angular structure, unlike the ancient oaks around it. If you looked closely, the twisted bark formed a silhouette that looked remarkably like a man at a drafting table, with gnarled roots that seemed to be holding an invisible pen. And in the very center of its trunk, there was a small, pale nodule that caught the moonlight, looking almost like a misplaced human tooth.